At this time, let's go ahead and begin today's event. Once again, the future of leadership, the Millennial Influence. It is my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today's webinar, John Wright and Christina Cleveland. John is the President and Managing Director at Canadian Management Center. He joined CMC in 2011, bringing more than 25 years of executive-level experience in B2B and B2C marketing and professional services. John has been a keynote speaker in CMC's Thought Leader Series and at Human Resources, Industry, and Government Ministry conferences over the last 2 years. John is also a sought-after commentator in the media, including the Globe and Mail, CTV News, CBC Radio, Yahoo Canada, and the HR Reporter, as well as many others. Christina is Senior Director, Talent Development Solutions at Canadian Management Center. She has experience leading global project teams through complex leadership development implementations and partners with CMC clients to consult through the analysis and development of their leadership strategies. At this time, I will hand the floor over to you, Christina.
Great. Thanks so much, Jess. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join us. I do have a few administrative items to review with you before we get started, one of which is that if you are on Twitter today, you do have the opportunity to tweet along with us and join our online conversation. So we do have a tweet and win opportunity for today's live event. So for every unique tweet using the hashtag CMC events, you will be entered into a draw to win one of 2 prize packs. And included in these prize packs are actually 2 books, one titled Generations at Work, the other Manager 3.0, both books published by our publishing arm of our strategic affiliate American Management Association. So they're Amicom published, and they were giveaways on our national tour. So you will be entered into a draw to win one of 2 prize packs for every unique tweet using the hashtag CMC events. And you'll also have the opportunity to receive 50% off the upcoming July 24th session in Toronto for our one-day program, Engaging a Multi-Generational Workforce. So do follow us on Twitter if you are online and join us to tweet and win. After today's session, you will receive an email with a link to a recording of today's session so that you are able to reference it. That will include a visual of the slides, so you will be able to get access to those so that you can both review it as well as share. And for those of you who are new to Canadian Management Center, just to give you a little bit of context on who we are an organization headquartered in Toronto, but we do work across the country. And we work with individuals and organizations to prepare their next generation of leaders by offering a number of different professional skill development programs, both inside organizations, but also through our open enrollment offerings. So to get more information about us, please feel free to visit our website, which is www.cmcoutperform.com. So we are here to talk about millennials today and the millennial influence on the future of leadership. But what would be helpful for us is to get a sense of who we actually have on the phone in terms of a demographic profile. So we will be opening up a poll, and this poll will open on the right-hand side of your screens. So you'll see the options come up for you to actually self-select which generational cohort you personally belong to. Of course, John and I will self-identify the cohorts that we belong to as well, but this information will give us an opportunity to just compare and contrast some of the findings from our recent poll, so that we can give you a comparison of how our demographic today fits into those who completed an online survey that will be releasing some of the results to you today. So again, on the right-hand side of your screen, just click in which of these generational cohorts you represent and press the Submit button, and then you'll have the option to enter your results for us. So the results are starting to come in. Looks like our generational profile is mostly Gen X, almost half on the call as Gen X, about 36% baby boomers and 14% millennials coming in and participating on the call today. So we should have an interesting dialogue. I will say that that parallels what we received in terms of results from our recent survey that we'll talk about today. So again, 50% now Gen X. I'm a Gen Xer, 34% baby boomers, and 15% millennials, and then 1% represented today with traditionalists. And we'll definitely have some conversations about each of these generational cohorts today as it connects into the millennial influence.
And I have to declare as well, I'm a baby boomer, but I like to consider myself a late boomer. Not a late bloomer, but a late boomer. I was just a few years off the cusp of being a Gen Xer, so that's my age cohort. But the other thing, too, is I have the unique experience of having a millennial in the house. He just completed university and is looking to get into the workforce, so a little bit of exposure to the younger end of the millennial group, but also over the last 10 years I've had dozens and dozens and dozens of millennials on my work teams, so a lot of exposure to them over the years, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the conversation.
Yeah, and we're really looking forward to talking about this topic with you because we have recently gone across the country and initiated our National Thought Leader Series tour, and that ran from February up until earlier this month where we wrapped it up. So we did deliver the session in 5 cities. In the GTA, we delivered in Toronto as well as Mississauga. And Canadian Management Centre's National Thought Leader Series has been designed to really start conversations on issues and topics that are impacting our clients and organizations today. So this year, we decided to set out and focus on the future of leadership and the millennial influence by actually initiating an interactive panel where we invited millennial leaders to participate in this panel discussion. And we had amazing organizations participating with us, individuals from the Globe and Mail, Pythian, Hydro Ottawa, Loyalty One, Sun Life Financial, the City of Calgary, AMIA, as well as Air Transat, all participating as panelists. So every year we send John out on the road. I think this is our longest tour, just in terms of scope and duration.
Yeah. But as Christina said, you know, we really enjoyed doing this particular Thought Leader Series because in addition to bringing information, it was a great way to bring perspectives. I would say this one was a little bit more controversial than some of the other ones we've done. And what I really enjoyed was in each city, some of the information we're going to share with you today, as well as a video that we created and showed at each of the live events, and we're going to tell you how to access that later on, really created some aha kind of reactions in the room. And I hope today that we also have some aha moments as we go through the webinar because it's a great topic. There's lots of different perspectives, but there's also now more research that we can bring to the discussion.
Absolutely. So to get us started, one of the things that we asked individuals who are participating in the national tour that we want to ask you was some of the characteristics that they have heard used to describe millennials. So either characteristics you may use yourself in terms of what you've observed, but also some of the characteristics you may have heard used to describe millennials. So in the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen as well, you have the opportunity to be able to open that up. If you wouldn't mind just submitting some of the details of characteristics that you've heard used to describe millennials, and we'll integrate that into the conversation. But again, that chat panel can open up on the right-hand side of your screen. You can just enter in your details and click on send, and that'll come through to us. Because what we want to do today is really actually have a conversation about who millennials are really. So talk a bit more about the characteristics and that we identify to associate them, but also some of the stereotypes that they're plagued by. We do want to talk about millennial values in the workplace, about the idea of preparing them for leadership. As we think about some of these millennials, many of them have been in the workforce for over 10 years and are transitioning into leadership roles really rapidly. How they're working with other generations and how other generations are working with them, and also some strategies to engage their full potential. So that's the focus of our discussion today, and we want to integrate for you some of what we've learned from the conversations that we've had across the country. But I am going to turn some attention to the feedback of the chat panel that we've got coming in. So I appreciate everyone submitting your comments. So in terms of characteristics, John, so characteristics that people have heard used to describe millennials, we have naive, spoiled, have a sense of entitlement, loyal to themselves rather than loyal to the company, that they may be impatient, they may be hardworking but need direction and supportive feedback. They're good with technology, they're carefree. They may be less loyal, again, coming up.
Don't forget self-absorbed.
Self-absorbed, yes. That definitely is coming through loud and clear in terms of perceptions that we've heard. Again, lazy is a descriptive characteristic that is coming up from individuals concerned about the environment, that they like to ask questions.
Motivated by work-life balance is up there a few times.
Creative, innovative, but also self-interested and need short-term rewards. So Some of the characteristics that we're hearing from you are very similar to some of the characteristics that we've heard from individuals from across the country. So John, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit with us in terms of what we were hearing from our attendees who came to the national tour.
Yeah, so as Christina said, we use this basically as an opening exercise in the live events and ask the tables to talk and then kind of report back to the room. And not surprisingly, because of the demographics of the room, and it is very similar to the demographics that we saw earlier in the poll, there's a lot of negative perceptions of millennials. I have to be honest with you, I understand why they're there, but I also think that some of that needs to be reframed, and that when you talk to millennials directly, as we did, and we'll share some of that with you today, they have a different take, not surprisingly, on some of those perceptions, but actually some of those perceptions are quite genuine in how they're looking at themselves in the workplace and what they bring to the workplace. So not surprisingly, there was really, on balance, more negativity around the descriptors than there was on the positive upsides, and I think that's part of the opportunity when all's said and done, that they bring a tremendous wealth of talent and potential to the workplace. And the fact is, as you'll see in a moment, the numbers show they're going to be the next leader, so how do we set them up for success going forward? So I thought I would start off with just a little bit of a generational profile when we talk about millennials, just so that we're all starting off the same page. So millennials, or Gen Y, either way you want to call them, born between 1981 and 1995. As Christina said, you know, from an age range perspective, they're anywhere between 19 years of age, maybe just finishing college or university, up to 33 years of age. And some of them have been in the workforce from anywhere from even 10 to 13 years. When you take a look at different age cohort groups, one thing to think about is life-defining events. Each age cohort has their big issue, their big thing. For this particular age group, there's no question that the 9/11 event in New York City was something that was very real to them. On the younger age scale, they were probably in school. Their school might have shut down or closed that day. Probably had some distressing conversations with parents and friends. All those kinds of things can happen. So that was very, very much a defining event. When we talk about that this age group is the first age group to be fully brought up in the digital age, they're called digital natives, and for good reason. They're very conversant with technology, very comfortable with it. The one thing that they didn't anticipate is a global financial crisis, and that global financial crisis has hit many of them very hard. People who were new into the workforce got laid off. People were not able to progress the way they wanted to in their jobs. Or right now, people coming into the workforce are finding it extremely hard to get first jobs, and there's all the conversations in the marketplace about internships and should they be paid, should they be free, and all of those kinds of things. From a pure numbers perspective, you can see up there, there are about 8.9 million of the total population in Canada, and currently about 29% of the total workforce. And that number, 29%, I want you to remember, because we're going to come back to it in a couple of slides, and it's an important number. Now, I said a minute ago that I think it's time to reframe. Some of the perceptions that you can see here, needy, technology, addicts, entitled, distracted, lazy, really, that's how a lot of the leaders in the workforce today look at millennials. However, if you flip the coin and ask millennials how they see themselves, you get a completely different view. Things like curious, multitaskers, efficient, confident, driven. And it is interesting if you start to do some word matchups. So, for example, if you go to the word distracted, we perceive them potentially as being distracted, yet they perceive themselves as being multitaskers. And we're not asking the question of what are you doing, and is it impacting what you're doing or not? They are very comfortable being on multi-screens or multi-devices at one point in time and being productive while they're doing it. Another thing is you would look at the word entitled. When you talk to them about it, they would actually match that up with the word confident. And so one of the powerful insights that we had as we traveled across the country was one of our panelists talked about the fact that Gen Ys have these particular attributes because they were raised by baby boomers. And that was a big aha for a lot of people in the room. It's kind of, we've cultivated these kinds of things, yet we're not seeing the reality as Gen Y see themselves. We're kind of hooked on or attached to the negative perceptions. And again, it's one of those things that over time we're going to have to get over and move on from.
Yeah, and I think we have a millennial who might be listening right now and actually just sent a note saying, I'm on 3 screens right now. So it is absolutely about multitasking, being very comfortable about being able to use multiple technologies or do multiple things at one time, and often that influences their ability to be engaged. They're more engaged and more able to think clearly if they've got a lot going on.
Absolutely. Now, one of the interesting numbers that we brought forward to the conversation is the here and now. By 2015, millennials will actually begin to outnumber baby boomers in the workforce in Canada. So it's not about, I guess I will get around to figuring out how to work with millennials, or I will get around to figuring out how to enable millennials to be successful leaders in my organization. The time's now. There's a high degree of urgency around this issue. And even over the longer run, if you look at global trends, by 2025, millennials will actually comprise 75% of the global workforce. So we took on this topic because we felt that there was an immediate pressing need, and it's here and now. And we'll talk even more about the kinds of things you can do now to help prepare your organization to set millennial leaders up for success in the future.
And I know there was a comment from a participant indicating that this particular statistic or number that we're seeing would happen only if the boomers retire. So there is a perception as well that baby boomers may not be moving out of the workforce as quickly as we had originally anticipated. So that global financial crisis that you mentioned, John, impacted that generation as well. So
absolutely.
We can talk a little bit more about that.
Yep. So again, let's take the millennials and put them into the age cohort perspective for the rest of the workforce in Canada. Starting with traditionalists. So traditionalists, they were born between 1927 and 1945. Generally speaking, they're about 70 years of age and over. They only comprise about 7% of the current workforce in Canada. To a large degree, many of them are working because they choose to work. In some cases because they like to be involved, they like to be busy, they may be business owners, consultants, whatever. And then in some cases, it's a financial reality that they have to be working. But generally speaking, again, small percentage of the current workforce. When you take a look at baby boomers overall, currently 37% of Canada's workforce. The youngest of that group today is turning 50. And what's happening, not surprisingly, in organizations across the country is people are starting to do some workforce planning, and they're realizing that in the next 5 years, there is a tremendous exit that's going to happen as boomers leave the workforce. And what's interesting about that is it's not just the fact that it's those people as individuals leaving the workforce, but by and large, it's people that are in leadership roles leaving the workforce. It's people with a lot of knowledge capital in their heads that's walking out the door. They're today's mentors of younger people, and they're leaving, and that causes a real problem inside companies. Then we talk about Gen X. Gen X is currently 27% of the population. Age group there is anywhere between 34 years of age to 49 years of age today. They are probably, as our research has shown, the most frustrated group in the market. They did not get what I would call the prosperity promise. They did everything they were supposed to do to become prosperous and successful, but it's been somewhat thwarted either by, as we talked about, baby boomers who haven't left the workforce, multiple recessions hitting them back economically, and now a compounding issue, which is leapfrogging Gen Ys, jumping over them for managerial roles. And some research that we looked at from E&Y quoted the fact that 87% of millennial managers have taken on a new role in the last 12 months versus only 38% of Gen X managers taking on new managerial responsibilities. So there is a leapfrogging that's happening out there. So back to the 29% that I talked about earlier, I wanted you to remember that number. Why it's important is because when you put it in contrast with this slide, it's clear that Gen Ys already outnumber the absolute number of Gen Xers in the workforce, and over the next 3 years, that number will only grow. It has a societal impact because for the first time, there will be a generation that does not get to set the societal agenda, and that's Gen X. Gen Y, it will jump from baby boomers to Gen Y to set, if you will, the music of society, the things that we focus on, the things that are all around us over the next decade or so. And if you just think about it in the contrast of boomers were all about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, now you've got Gen Ys as a bigger age cohort group, and their preferences, their tastes will set our culture going forward, skipping the Gen X group, unfortunately.
Well, and Gen Xs are well represented today. So again, 50% of those who are listening in on the call, we have over almost 1,200 people that are registered today. And it looks like based on the earlier poll that we conducted, for those of you who joined us a little bit after the start of the hour, we have 50% that are Gen X, 34% on the line Boomer, 14% Millennial, and about 1% Traditionalist. So those Gen Xers are commenting in the chat panel and agreeing with you, John, just in terms of their levels of frustration in their organization, and that many forget that Gen Xers were raised by baby boomers, but they were also raised by traditionalists. So some of those sort of legacy characteristics have transferred over. I know I myself, as an Xer, was raised by traditionalist parents. And my millennials on my team lovingly refer to me as a baby boomer trapped in a Gen Xer's body. So we all really embody some of these characteristics that may show up at work, but there's this new generation that's emerging into the workforce that we definitely need to pay some attention to.
Yeah, and we just wanted to touch on this, again, just for really completeness of information. There is an emerging Gen Z group. Born in 1996. The oldest of those are entering the workforce at about age 18 right now. The fact of the matter is they are somewhat similar to Gen Y, but they're also different in the sense, if Gen Ys were digital natives, this Gen Z group is actually a tethered generation. And if you think about some of the things that are talked about with young teenagers being obsessive about their mobile devices, having it with them 7/24, always on, interrupted sleep patterns, all those kinds of things, that definitely is part of that generation. So there's not a lot of research on them. We need to watch them more closely and see how they will enter the workforce and what impacts they will have. We do know two things about them. Number one, there's a common expression that's used. It's called FOMO. I don't know if anybody out there on the webinar today is suffering from FOMO. I hope not, because if you're here, then you're not missing out. And FOMO is defined as the fear of missing out. And it really runs that generation, and it's why they're posting all the time. They use the social platforms that they do because they want to be constantly connected and not missing out. The other thing we need to think about is that age demographic is the first group that's really gotten involved in cyberbullying. Will it come to the workplace? It's a question. It's an open question. We don't know. So those two behaviors, fear of missing out and cyberbullying, again, no research on it to date, but something to just watch for as they enter the workplace. And with Gen Z now, there are 5 different age cohorts in the workforce for managers to manage simultaneously, the first time ever that we've had 5 age cohorts on the ground in companies at the same time.
We wanted to bring this topic forward and talk about this as the future of leadership. And again, I'm really enjoying the commentary that's coming in through the chat panel. So there's a few people that have some questions that linked into the Gen X commentary. John, it can't be avoided with more than half of us on the line in terms of seeing it as a rather depressing outlook for Gen Xers. But the future of leadership definitely lies in millennials continuing to come into the workforce, and many of the Xers are in those frontline and middle management, even senior leadership positions right now, and are bringing this cohort along, or they're squeezed between baby boomers and the millennials. But we want to talk about the millennial influence on the future of leadership.
Yeah, and we brought this topic forward to our National Thought Leaders series under the simple premise that listening to our clients, what were they talking about, and what do they need to be concerned about? What has been the historic conversation over the last decade has been about how to incorporate and how to engage millennials as new employees into the workforce. Well, the numbers we just showed you clearly shows that that's an old discussion. What needs to be talked about now is setting millennials up for success as current leaders and future leaders inside your organizations, and that's what we wanted to focus on during our Thought Leader series.
Great. So we do want to open up another poll for you and asking about the percentage of survey respondents for a recent survey that CMC conducted, which is called Reality Check, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But again, on the right-hand side of your screen, the polling option will open up for you. I'll give you a hint that we did already tell you this statistic, so it'll be interesting to see how much we were able to retain. The survey that we're pulling from, and continue to enter in your responses into the poll on the right-hand side, is from a survey that CMC initiated, which is part of our Reality Check series. And what Reality Check does is it provides an opportunity for us to get insights and opinions about what's happening in the workforce today. So this particular survey was initiated in February of this year. We are going to be releasing the results very shortly, and we'll be able to tell you how you'll be able to get access to that. We had over 2,200 people respond to the survey, majority which align with the percentages on this call. So majority were Gen X and baby boomers, and more than 70% were actually in leadership roles. So that's what helped to give us some indicators about baby boomer and Gen X perceptions of millennials in the workforce, and the fact that many organizations just aren't ready for the shift and transition that is really at our feet. So this is Canadian data. So we're really excited to be able to have our own results from insights that our individuals and clients have provided to us. So right now, based on the response to the question that we asked you what percentage of survey respondents do you think cited millennials as challenging to lead and engage? And from the poll results right now, it looks that about 45% said 26 to 50%. Rated them as the most challenging, and about 41% rated it as more than half of survey respondents, indicating that they're the most challenging to lead and engage. And survey says
54% of our respondents actually identified millennials as the most challenging to lead and the most challenging to engage. So not really a great story when the current people who are managing and leading Gen Y individuals feel that way, and knowing that Gen Ys will become the next leaders, there's probably some rub-off effect. So let's flip the coin and find out what happens when you approach Gen Ys and ask them how engaged they are in their workplaces. And we did this last year. We did a national study called Build a Better Workplace. It was a report that we co-authored with Ipsos Reid, and we asked the questions of all different age cohorts, how engaged they were, and to identify themselves as highly engaged. What the study showed that only 24% of Gen Y individuals consider themselves to be highly engaged. So when you put those two pieces of information together, you have a problem. The current leaders of Gen Y employees find them hard to lead and hard to engage. Flip the coin, and the millennials who are being led and are trying, people are trying to engage, say they're not all that engaged themselves at only 24%. And then the compounding issue is that this age group is also highly mobile. They will quickly leave companies that they perceive as not getting them in search of companies that they perceive do get them as individuals and understand their wants, their values, and their work styles. So this is really a bit of a recipe for disaster if companies aren't tuned in to what's needed to solve the problems of this age cohort group, and we'll talk about that towards the end of today's discussion.
And we've got some millennials who are participating today who are commenting in the chat panel that one of the things that they are frustrated about is that they may not be seen or respected in the roles that they hold because they're young. And every single one of us, regardless of our generational cohort, has had that experience of being new to the workforce, being the youngest one in the room, and having the opportunity and need to influence. But the way that millennials manage that and manage themselves is different than other generations, and kind of adds to the urgency about why we need to pay attention.
Yeah, and it was interesting, you know, as we had the panelists in each city, one of the topics that we talked about, especially during the question and answer section, was about this issue of credibility versus capability. And that was that a lot of the Gen Ys felt they were capable enough to be moving into a first-line manager type position, but there was an issue about youth and credibility. And so we talked about strategies that companies should be using to try and give those younger potential leaders visibility ahead of the promotion periods so that they're seen on cross-functional teams, as an example, to be people who have knowledge, have capability, have leadership potential, and that's clearly seen before they're put into a leadership role where people might be raising an eyebrow about why them and why now.
and comments coming in is that it's not because they're young, but their behavior maybe doesn't necessarily demand respect, and that could be open to interpretation depending on who's making the observation and what their experience has been. And also this perception that baby boomers are expecting young employees to be immediately able to contribute from day one, and forgetting that there's this big gap, an uphill climb of trying to build experience and kind of find your way.
Yeah, I'd love to come back to that towards the end of the discussion if we've got a bit of time in the Q&A. I think there's definitely some things that millennials can do to help advance their cause in this regard.
Definitely.
So we want to take a little closer look at millennials as we did the national tour. There seem to be three topics that really got people excited and got people engaged, and in some cases got some really good discussions going. First of all, focusing on what millennials as an age cohort group, what they value in the workplace. The second is asking the basic question whether or not millennials, generally speaking, are prepared for leadership roles that are in front of them. And third, are companies doing what they can and what they should to manage the impact of having a millennial move into a leadership role. So those are the next three topics we're going to cover. So I'm going to start with the whole issue of millennial values, because we found by talking about this topic literally for over a year that understanding the true underpinning values of each age cohort group makes a substantial difference to understanding. Making sure that this bedrock of belief is understood makes a huge difference. And in this particular case, we were very fortunate. As Christina mentioned at the beginning, we have a publishing company in the United States called Amicom. And one of the books that we looked at and one of the authors that we relied on was the book Manager 3.0. And the two authors were Brad Karsh and Courtney Templin, and they identified these 5 millennial values in the workplace. Number 1 being collaborative, number 2 being flexible, number 3 being transparent, number 4 being casual, and number 5 being balanced. So what does that mean? Well, let's start with number 1, being collaborative. Collaborative in this case means they like to work in teams and believe in the power of synergy and having an opportunity to contribute to ideas or projects. One of the things that I believe, having worked with millennials for quite a long time, is collaboration for them is kind of like oxygen. It's just totally natural, and it's totally needed and totally expected. When we talk about flexibility, we're talking about the fact that this group is open to how the job gets done and are much less concerned themselves about where it gets done and when it gets done. This translates into an openness and a desire for flexible work arrangements and flexible schedules. Next, we move to transparency. They believe in sharing information with everyone who needs to know. They like to understand the why of whatever issue or topic is being discussed. They want problems to be shared. They'd like strategies to be discussed. And they also like to be part of the solution or action plan that's going to remedy the problem at hand. Then we go on to casual. Now, casual is one that gets a lot of airtime around this group. There's a very strong preference for an informal work environment, and this ranges from how they dress to how people interact, and also to just the basic issue of a lack of hierarchy is good for them and is comfortable for them because, again, to be honest, that's how they've been raised by boomers. And the last one is balance. This particular age group has an expectation of a more fulfilling approach to life. They don't want to simply balance their work and life. They actually want to integrate them. And this is directly connected to their need to have flexible work arrangements. So now I'm going to turn it over to Christina to take the next step and open up a poll and find out what is resonating with you of any of these particular values.
Yeah, so based on what John described, what we're interested in knowing is which of these values would you prioritize as most important to you? And I think for all of us, we can see value in all of the values that are listed, but there may be one that stands out more than another for you. So again, the poll is opening up on the right-hand side of your screen so that you have the ability to enter in your vote on which of these you would prioritize as most important to you. And what we will do is also just do a bit of a comparison for you in terms of how this shook out within the Reality Check series and some of the feedback that we got and how that broke out by generational cohort. As we went across the country, this was probably the most popular topic in terms of understanding what millennials do value in the workforce, which is interesting because I would have thought that since millennials have been in the workplace that for over 10 years, we've kind of figured it out a little bit in terms of the fact that they may value and expect different things. And the conversations clearly indicated to us that we're still talking about it, we're still trying to understand, and many organizations are still continuing to try and adapt some of their practices to accommodate that. So there's some legacy cultures of traditionalist leaders, older boomer leaders that are still lingering within organizations. So there hasn't quite been the evolution yet.
I think one of the other things that popped up around the discussion of values was to some degree of frustration or an annoyance that some people were saying, why should us as a company have to bend and be flexible to the needs of the new workers, the Gen Ys? They should be coming in at least halfway to our direction and flexing our way. And while that makes great sense, it's actually a problem for two reasons. Number one, as I said, numerically, they're going to take over the workforce anyways. So if you don't want to deal with the challenges today, it's okay, because they'll become your boss soon enough and they'll deal with it when they become that role. Now, being less flippant about it, the other reality is, can you really truly change culture of a age cohort group? Can you change their value systems? And the answer is no. It's like saying, well, why didn't we change the value sets of boomers as they came through the workforce? Because you couldn't. And so what you need to do is try to your best to understand where they're coming from, why they're coming from that place, and what can be done that's actually, and I'll talk about it in a moment, about creating a more inclusive workplace where it kind of can work for everybody.
Yep, definitely. And so the results are shaking out from your participation in the poll. And number one rated response, 33%, was collaborative. Number two is transparent. Three, being flexible. And I had that out of order. Collaborative, balanced, transparent, and then flexible and casual. So that was pretty consistent, actually, with the reality check survey. And given that we've got mostly Gen X and boomers on the line today, that is consistent. With the millennials that we had out on our national tour, they definitely showed some preference along the lines. Collaboration was really important to them, just the opportunity to work with others, learn from others, because they want to learn from others. They respect competence in other individuals. And the opportunity to just make a contribution. Like, I have ideas and I want to bring them forward. And then the second one coming out in terms of balance, this is this work-life integration, this idea that they don't necessarily work 9 to 5, but they will actually put in longer hours if there's flexibility within their work environment to dictate how the work gets done. So they may not want to have the face time in the office because they are integrating their life around their work, but their jobs become an extension of who they are. So in terms of engaging your millennials, some of the suggestions that we had discussed as we went out on our national tour was really focusing on elements that we know drive employee engagement. And those elements are alignment, satisfaction, and involvement. And those pieces ultimately influence loyalty. And this generation, when we said that they're different than others, is that they will, as John says, vote with their feet. If they're not happy in their current work environment, or they feel that their contributions aren't being solicited, aren't being valued, they will leave their organization and move on to another opportunity. So it's really critical that leaders take the time to learn more about what they value, encourage their involvement, and be open and share information with them. And when we were out on tour, one of the millennial leaders who was a panelist with us, who worked for Canada's largest national newspaper, the Globe and Mail, actually shared a story about his personal experience working within an organization that wasn't quite ready to adopt a new way of thinking, to integrate some of the suggestions that he had for what they needed to do better or differently in their organization, which would ultimately influence their ability to be successful. And he made a decision to leave the organization. And fortunately, in this story, in less than a year, the organization saw the value of what he was contributing and actually made a decision to initiate some of the ideas that he had put forward and reached out to him and called him back. And he rejoined the organization and is now a contributing leader, elevated in terms of his role, was promoted into a new position where he's now managing a team, some millennial and some not. But that's an example, in this case, a happy ending of a millennial whose values could be integrated into the workplace, but the speed at which we're moving doesn't necessarily align with the the speed that they expect. But if their expectations aren't managed or they don't necessarily understand how they're going to fit in, that's going to create concern for them. And they do have definitely clear career paths for themselves and dreams and hopes and aspirations and expectations that they place on themselves to continue to evolve into positions. So we do want to transition to the conversation to be focused on millennials as leaders and whether or not they're ready, because they think they are.
Yeah, I think this whole topic of are they ready, it kind of depends who you ask. So if you go back to our reality check study, the respondents said two clear things. 54% of them said that millennials are the hardest to manage and engage, and also 42% of them said that millennials are also the hardest to build a relationship with. So in terms of trying to figure out how to help them become leaders, it's a challenge. Again, flipping the coin, when you ask millennials, do you think you are ready to lead, many of them will say, yes, but I have some concerns or challenges. One of the challenges, as we talked about a few minutes ago, is this topic of capability versus credibility and what the organization has done to help them also build their profile and therefore their credibility so that they can step into a leadership role. The second thing is, because of the change in the age group, in the makeup, it's not as linear as it used to be. You're asking a new millennial manager to potentially manage somebody who potentially is the same age as their parents. That causes a bit of angst on really both sides of that relationship. And then there might be a Gen X person as well who's saying, hey, I got passed over, I don't understand. So they feel like organizations may not be equipping them in a way to allow them to lead the different age groups and be sensitive to those different age groups.
So when we talk about whether or not millennials are ready to transition into leadership positions, I think it's important to also comment on the fact that some of the younger generations within Gen X and millennials or Gen Y are not necessarily wanting to move into leadership roles. So I do think we want to call that point out. So when someone has commented in the chat panel about being a millennial and thinking that balance is huge for their generation. They saw their parents work for 20+ years in an organization at jobs they didn't like. They worked crazy hours. It was thankless work, or in some cases they ended up getting laid off. And Gen X and millennials looked at that and said, you know what, that's not the life I want for myself. So there are many within these two generational cohorts of X and millennials who have made decisions to perhaps not pursue leadership roles, that they're very happy being individual contributors, that they can influence in a different way and at a different level, and they don't necessarily need to move into leadership roles. But there are those who really have the level of ambition where they want to move into leadership positions, and it's important that organizations are looking to prepare for the future. And often we shy away from some of these conversations because we think we may not have anything immediate to put in front of them. But as we went out on tour, one example that we gave is that millennials, many have come out of school where the course syllabus is mapped out for them. They know what's expected from them at each level as they go through different programs or courses. And they have the opportunity to see what books they need to read, what projects they need to contribute, how they need to potentially contribute in order to get results. So it's important that organizations help to define the role of a leader and collaborate to build a career path, but also that organizations are looking to invest in their development. So these three components, defining the role of a leader, collaborating to build a career path, and investing in their development, are ways that organizations can actually contribute to helping to prepare these millennials for future roles. But that, again, that conversation some organizations may shy away from because they may feel that they've got flatter structures, there's not as much room to move. There are learning opportunities, job shadowing opportunities, mentoring opportunities that can easily be created. And when we were on tour, one organization that contributed as panelists was from Sun Life Financial. And they actually were brought into the organization within the 3-year rotational program. So they moved through different positions, had the opportunity to get exposed to different aspects of the business, to get a sense for themselves about what they really like and enjoy. But what an amazing development opportunity to be able to see, how an organization functions, to get access to work in different positions, but to also feel respected for their contribution and to understand what the next 3 years are going to look like. And the carrot, really, that's dangling for them at the end of those 3 years is to, ultimately stay on with the organization. That kind of commitment and investment will absolutely help to build loyalty from these millennials to the organizations where they are, and that's ultimately the outcome. So we talked about preparing for leadership. I do think we want to spend some time on collaborating with other generations, especially since there's conversation heating up on the chat panel to us about, how do millennials, we're focusing on how boomers and Xers should adapt to millennials. How are we showing millennials how to adapt to boomers and Xers?
So one of the really fun topics as we had the live event discussions was this whole area of collaborating with other generations, because although we focused on millennials today, it's only a piece of the story, and we all know that part of the reality is all the generations need to work together. They do need to get along, but the challenge is what are organizations doing to make sure that that is being facilitated and that environment is being created. So going back to our reality check study, 97% of respondents said that they totally agree that there are differences between the age cohort groups. The challenge is, though, only 26% reported that their organization is offering any kind of training or information resources to help them understand the differences between the generations. And consequently, you have these dangling concerns around what are the issues between generation to generation? What are the perceptions or misperceptions, as we looked at earlier, that are driving challenges and potentially even conflict? And then the other one is, what about the strengths? What are the strengths that the different age groups bring to the workplace? And how do you literally maximize that potential going forward? So really, in terms of managing the impact, there was 3 areas that we touched on. The first was creating awareness. The second was offering training solutions and resources for people. And the third was fostering an inclusive environment. What we've certainly seen is that it's not just a Gen Y thing alone. The issue is about creating awareness, and a great one is just values, starting with values. What do the different age groups have in terms of their defining values, and how do they either line up or how do they differ? Because sometimes even the same word and the same value may not mean exactly the same thing to the different age groups. I'll give you an example. We talked about the word collaboration. With boomers, most boomers look at collaboration as an earned right. It's something that as you gain experience, you're invited into those meetings and your opinion is then asked for, but it's an earned right. Gen Xers sometimes like to work more in a solitary manner. They certainly will collaborate with others, but on a need-to-know basis. And then Gen Y, exactly the same word, but very, very different. Gen Ys have a very natural expectation to collaborate, to participate, and to share. So for them, as I said earlier, it's like oxygen. So there's just one example with one word, with one style that has a different meaning in different age groups. So getting awareness and understanding across the groups is critical. Offering training and resources, absolutely vital. To develop that understanding, and sometimes even doing something really concrete. One of the panelists we had in Toronto worked at a company here called Loyalty One. That organization runs the Air Miles Reward program in Canada, and they talked about the fact that they had adopted what they called a reverse mentoring program. And by that, they took their senior leaders at their executive committee level, who were virtually all either high-age Gen Xers or kind of low-age boomers, and matched them up with Gen Ys. And it wasn't so that the executive committee members could mentor the Gen Ys. It was the exact opposite. It was so that Gen Ys could mentor those older age cohort leaders on what that generation was all about, and again, to develop a really good understanding. And then when it comes to fostering an inclusive environment, one of the best examples that we heard came when we were in Montreal. There's a company called AMIA. They also have an office here in Toronto. That company actually runs the Aeroplan partnership nationally. And they really looked at transparency and said, transparency here is not just the way that we interact with each other, but it's how we're actually going to change our physical space. And so as a result, there are no office walls in their new environments, and even to the extent where their senior leaders also no longer have offices. They are transparent, they are accessible, and that's a huge statement inside an organization to try and bring collaboration into the workplace.
That's great. So I think one of the things that I found interesting within the reality check survey as well, in terms of that 97% agree that there are differences, the 3% that didn't think that there were differences were actually majority millennial responses. So it's kind of interesting just in terms of perception. They are coming into the workforce bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I mean, they don't have the years of experience that other generations may have, but they are looking at the promise and opportunity of what lies ahead, and they come in, very open and willing to collaborate. And I think that, that I guess eagerness or keenness is sometimes misinterpreted as them being naive, but they really do have a strong desire to collaborate and to make a contribution. So as John was saying, being able to focus on training and resources, we do offer a one-day engaging a multi-generational workforce program. And John, I don't know if you want to comment a little bit on that in terms of what we've been hearing from attendees on the need for this.
Yeah, when we had the national series, certainly there was a real desire for people to get up to speed very quickly on understanding the differences between the generations and understanding how to very quickly get them to work together in a much more collaborative manner, in a much more open, transparent, and a frictionless type of environment. So again, this particular course concentrates a lot on awareness building, but also has some practical hands-on skills as well. For those organizations that are interested in this particular type of training, we do on-site training at companies all across Canada. We also have an open enrollment course as well that Christina mentioned at the outset. And so either way, you can have people participate and really get up to speed very quickly on these different age groups and how to be successful managing all of them and having a great environment for all of them.
So I do want to just come back to the solutions for preparing for leadership, because I understand that there was a bit of a technology glitch there and the slide may not have loaded for all of you. So in terms of preparing for the future, what we had reviewed as some strategies were defining the role of a leader, collaborating to build a career path, and investing in the development of the millennials. The other critical component for millennials as we start to groom them for future roles is that feedback is critically important to them. They need feedback, and we'd say constant feedback, and it doesn't necessarily have to be praise. I know that there's this perspective that all they want is head pats and hugs, and everyone gets a ribbon and to feel that they're getting recognition. They need that. We all need that. But what millennials do want to do is learn about what they can do better or differently. What skills do they need to develop to be able to move forward? How can they continue to grow within their roles so that they can achieve what John actually coined as a term on tour is mastery? That it's important for them to in fact master a skill, master a particular role versus just doing it. And some millennials realize that, and others may be developing that perspective or perception that they do need to be focused a little bit more on how to actually master a particular skill. So I do want to turn attention to the Q&A panel, and John, we had a request to just review the years for millennials in terms of their birth years, as well as for Gen Z. So for millennials it was 1981 to 1995, and for Gen Z from 1996
and forward.
Yeah, perfect. So John, one of the questions that has come in is this idea about having a top-heavy baby boomer organization and needing to communicate with executives at that level to help them understand the need to focus on this particular generational cohort.
Yeah, and interestingly, these kind of challenges come up often. It's almost topic agnostic because when you've got baby boomer leadership teams, Some of them are a little bit set in their ways and their perspectives, and again, believe that they don't need to necessarily bend or flex, that people will, quote unquote, they'll come along. But in fact, that's not the case. And in fact, the challenge is if you're not thinking proactively about this, you will lose talent. You will lose in the war on talent. So how do you get senior executives' attention? Well, most of the time, the thing that works the best is to speak in their language, speak in their outcomes. Things like not addressing this issue will have a significant impact on our results. That could be financial results, market share, customer satisfaction, customer loyalty. You define the key results that you think you can draw a very clear line between, but focus on impact on results. Another one is clearly a loss of innovation, and then that leads to a loss of competitiveness. This age group has tremendous creative abilities. They are digital natives, so they don't look at creating ideas and solutions just unto themselves working at a desk. They reach out. They have lots of networks and contacts to go into. You never know where their solution is going to come from, but you're going to lose innovation. You're going to lose competitiveness if you don't set yourself up to be successful with this group. I talked about the turnover risk, and when there's turnover, that's just not the people leaving, but that's the associated costs of trying to find replacement workers, bring them on side, onboard them, get them up to speed. Those are hard costs that you can measure. And then the last thing is just pure, simple workforce planning mathematics. We have a number of clients who have done the work. They can clearly show their leadership teams that there is a coming leadership succession crisis, and that they need to be thinking early now about what's happening with the retiring boomers and where are the next level of managers and the frontline managers to replace everybody in that managerial chain. So those are the kinds of more business language types of conversations you can have with executive teams rather than focusing on a topic around, I have challenges around millennials.
Perfect. So because we are approaching sort of the end of our time together, what I think we might do actually is wrap up the session, but we'll continue with some of the Q&A so that for those who need to wrap up, we can get this critical information to you. And then also we are going to be sending a recording to you that will give you access to the visual of the slides and also the audio, and we'll include that additional Q&A portion. But someone is asking about our upcoming course. Again, the date is July 24th. You do have the option to bring this on site into your organization. So if you are interested, you can call us at the number identified on the screen to discuss details, or go to our website at cncoutperform.com for more information. We are going to raffle off an opportunity for free registration into that one-day course happening in July, actually. So when you wrap up today's session, you will be asked to complete an online survey that will give us some feedback on the content of today's session, but also input on what you'd like to see covered in the future. So for everyone who completes the survey, you will be entered into a draw. We will be giving away one free registration to the July 24th session in Toronto for engaging a multi-generational workforce. And again, you can visit our website to get additional information. So for those of you who do have to sign off now, we absolutely appreciate having you here with us today to continue the conversation on this important topic. We are going to continue the conversation on the millennial influence and as well on multi-generational workforce at CMC. So continue to stay tuned to our website for information. The reality check survey will soon be released, so keep in touch with our website to be able to get that, or send us your contact information and we'll be able to share an overview of the results with you. So thank you for those of you who do need to sign off for joining us today, and for those of you who are able to stay on the line, we will continue to just go through a few of the questions that we received from you so that we can make sure that we pay attention to all of the comments that you've submitted. Thank you very much, everyone.
So what's up next?
So one of the questions that came in from a participant was that millennials like to be in groups. So they form friendships at work, very much value those friendships, and then may move into leadership roles where they have to manage their friends. So what are your thoughts on the potential barriers this may create for them to wanting a leadership role, because maybe they don't want to be the odd one out?
I guess my experience in managing significant numbers of millennials is I've never hit that as a challenge. I certainly get that as new workers into the workforce, and they certainly like to be in teams and pools. The challenge becomes the first one that gets promoted and becomes sort of the boss of the others. And, you know, it's not age cohort specific, because a lot of times there may be jealousy, there may be some challenges around perceived capability and those kinds of things. So generally, you've got to be sensitive to both the person who gets promoted. Make sure that you're investing some time and resources in training them on how to be an effective manager. And most importantly in that discussion is how they need to develop objectivity, because it's only through developing that objectivity, which a manager has to have, that they have to look at their entire managed workforce. That can include the people that they came into the organization with. That may be people who they became peers with as they were in the organization for a year or two. And again, one of the tactics that a few of the panelists talked about in their own companies was a very deliberate approach to get people involved in cross-functional leadership roles ahead of a particular promotion, giving the people not just the visibility of seeing to be leaders, but also giving them the practical hands-on experience of having a leadership role and starting to get comfortable in their own skin that they're now a leader and they're different than just being one of the team or one of the group.
And so a question also coming in about why would millennials be put into leadership roles over Gen X? So the fact that idea that they may be leapfrogging some of the Gen X colleagues into leadership positions.
When all said and done, I don't think it's one versus the other. Most organizations are generally making the decisions on who is best qualified. Now, having said that, I can see from the chat panel, but I also know from talking with folks on the national tour, there is a concern still about the wrong people being selected and promoted based on maybe likability alone and not on capability as well as likability and all those kinds of things. But when it comes down to it, there are a range of things that can influence someone being promoted. You know, first and foremost, it's about reputation. What is your personal reputation inside your organization and potentially outside your organizations if you have sort of external partner type relationships or key accounts or clients that you deal with? It's the basic question of what are you known for? Are you known for someone who is knowledgeable, who is likable, who has a high degree of maturity? How are you perceived as a business professional? Another one is, are you trustworthy? As you move up the corporate chain, you're going to be given more and more sensitive information. Are you trustworthy? And ultimately, all those things together, do you have leadership potential? So I think, generally speaking, most organizations who are being objective about it will weigh those out against different candidates. Gen-wise may have a slight edge in some areas like innovation. They may have a slight edge in building collaborative teams. But Gen X's have also more experience. They've got sort of the calloused hands, if you will, of experience and knowing, you know, I made that mistake when I was first in the organization. I won't do that again. So really leveraging that experience base is one of their trump cards to play as they try and move forward.
Well, and I also think for millennials, many of them are master networkers, so they know how to get themselves out there, they know how to promote themselves, they know how to raise their hand, and they will. So they'll constantly, if there's an opportunity there or not, they're going to put it out there as to what they want to do and say, yeah, I'd really be interested in doing this. Whereas I think Gen X has definitely over the years, they're very, I'm going to say they, meaning most, are very focused on their own development, and so they have been investing in training or education with the idea of what's this going to bring me next in terms of the next step in my career. They want organizations to invest in them, and maybe they'll invest in the organization. But I think because millennials are so willing to put themselves out there and to network and to navigate and to seek out opportunities, that helps to put them in the forefront, and kind of they become, you know, put themselves in the eyes of the executives that may be selecting for leadership positions or opportunities, and they'll be the first to raise their hand. So I think that that's why, another one of the reasons why they may be leapfrogging, but also the numbers. The numbers are just there to have them move into those positions faster.
Yeah. And I do want to just offer up one sort of tangent thought around this, because once it surfaced in our live event in Montreal, it became a bit of a theme as we moved across the country. And that was that one of the things that organizations, and especially current managers and leaders, need to really think about is that when you promote a millennial into a new leadership position, one of the skill areas they probably haven't had enough time to develop is the ability to have political savvy. And so you're taking someone, putting them into an organization, and while all of us would like to say, I don't have a political organization, most of us do, and it's only a matter of degree of high or low. So that's a challenge because they haven't had the experience of how to play politics, and I'm talking small p politics, effectively. And so you need to also think about how to train them to do that, but train them in a way that's going to be positive and be a positive contributor inside the organization versus negative. And that's really aligning people to the core goals of the organization, the outcomes that you're trying to create, the culture that you're trying to create, and less about more sort of tearing down political behaviors that are just negative and certainly are not worth perpetuating.
So another question that's come in, John, is because balance is a key value of millennials, do you see this as a barrier for them being promoted into manager roles as the expectations are different? So thinking in terms of needing to be physically available to their team by having the face time in the office, or maybe not needing or wanting to put in the kind of hours that may be required.
Yeah, I think in the short run that will continue to be a bit of a barrier, but I say that as only sort of the short run. I think what's going to happen is that as more and more millennials move into managerial and supervisory roles, the issue won't be about their ability to manage a team. It'll be about the face time part of it. We certainly have clients in Canada and internationally where we actually do training programs on how to manage virtually remote teams. And I think that that's just going to come. I think that because it is so core to their belief set and so core to some of the lifestyle choices they want to make, it won't be about you weren't there to help me. It's just that I'm helping you from a different way. Sometimes I'm physically there. Sometimes I'm on the phone with you. Sometimes I'm on my device with you. But frankly, I'm always there for you. I'm always turned on and accessible for you. So I think the sort of expectation will change over time.
Another question, John, is do you find that Gen Ys have difficulty communicating ideas to Gen X and baby boomers because they're using technology?
Not so much. I mean, I think some of the ideas that are brought forward, they may sort of start on the net. And from that perspective, you will scratch your head and go, I don't really know exactly what you're talking about, because they found some particular new website or some particular app or something that's gone viral that you may not have seen. But again, it's just a source of information. And I don't think you get into a lot of techno-babble because it's not going to be helpful. And frankly, if you've got someone at a millennial level, and now with the Gen Z group coming in, where if they just keep talking in technobabble, they're going to find themselves getting nowhere, because they do want to be understood, and they'll have to adapt and change some of their language. So I do think it's something that's a catalyst for ideas. It's a catalyst for innovation. It's certainly a catalyst for creativity. I don't think it's going to be a barrier, though.
Well, and I sort of wonder when it comes to, the idea of communicating to older generations. With the millennials, I think there's a lot of assumptions made, because within their generation, if there's something new out there or something happening in the world, it's just generally assumed that everybody knows about it, because you have as much access to the internet and to your smartphone as I do.
Yeah.
Whereas it's just a simple best practice that anybody can benefit from, whether you're millennial or not, is that when you're communicating or sharing information with another individual or individuals, put yourself in the seat of those people and figure out how they may need to receive the information, what they currently know, what they need to know, and then therefore what the gap is and what you need to share with them.
Yeah, and just on that kind of topic, one of the phrases that I've found incredibly helpful in coaching people over the years has been the basic concept of, if you're trying to communicate to others, you need to stop and think about it for a minute. And the phrase is, you need to speak into the other person's listening. And the concept is kind of like a radio frequency. You need to figure out what level of information with what level of complexity you can share with the person you're trying to communicate with so that you can be effective at transferring that information. And that's kind of, again, age agnostic. If you're trying to speak into the other person's listening, it starts from your own listening, your own observation, and starting to think about how do I package up the information I'm trying to communicate and do it in a way that's effective for others. So that to me is something that, if you can master that skill, that's a phenomenal communication skill to have for your entire life and career, regardless of what age you can start that at.
Well, there's a comment from another attendee in terms of, how does a late boomer set up a millennial for success without feeling lesser of a professional with their advanced technology proficiency or what they may know versus what I may know. So you don't want to look like you're less than or know less as their leader. And I think vulnerability lends itself to millennials to, have a bit of a sense of humor about, what you know and what you don't know, and looking to them to share information with you. They want to. They'll be more than happy to. It's easy for them, and chances are that might open up the way for them to tap into you for something that they don't necessarily know and want to learn from you.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Christina. I totally understand, and I totally empathize with that person's position. You certainly don't want to feel like you don't know, and no matter what age group you're at. If you go back in time, there's always the jokes about, my parents can't figure out how to set up their VCR, so I have to go and do it for them. Well, VCRs don't exist anymore. We've moved on in technology. I do think the the idea of having kind of a shared mentoring, because clearly one of the really interesting things was Gen Ys, and they use the word terrified. They are terrified that the boomers are leaving the workforce with all the experience, all the battle scars, all the wisdom that they may not get a chance to tap into before they actually physically leave the workplace. So I do think that there's a really great opportunity for some shared mentoring. You can share your experience with them and build up their experience base based on your history and your knowledge, and exchange that for building up your technology savvy, because that's their area of expertise. And when you think about it that way, it can come across as a fairly fair exchange of information and knowledge.
And I think, just to kind of build the bridge between other generations and millennials to other generations, even an opportunity like this where you could share what you learned in a webinar discussion or share the webinar with them, I think they're more than happy to talk about, what they expect and value, to talk a little bit on behalf of their generation and to, share what their expectations are. And it helps to just open up the conversation. It shows them that you're interested, that you want to get to know a little bit more about, what it is that they are looking for from their workplace, from their leader, and just helps to kind of create a bit more of that conversation and start to build more of that awareness.
And I think, again, as we went across the country and engaged with the different panelists and the live groups, something that I had always thought but clearly was confirmed for me is that millennials do have a high degree of respect for the people already in the workplaces that they operate. As a going-in proposition, generally, they have a high degree of respect. And again, when you think about it, a lot of them do because their parents were boomers, and for the most part, they have a high degree of respect for, if not their parents, then other people in their family networks, etc. So there's an instant respect there. What's interesting, though, is you will erode that respect very, very quickly if it's not reciprocated in some way, shape, or form, because everybody wants to feel like they're being respected. And while the millennials coming in may not have the knowledge base, they do have the creativity. One of the sessions that we had, one of the people in the room talked about the fact that she worked for a pharmaceutical company, and her challenge was she had millennials who were pushing to change the process that they use for certification of drugs, and her comment was, hey, look, I know you want to change everything, but have you met Health Canada? Because they don't, basically the implication was they don't want to change. And I thought, well, that's an interesting observation and perspective, but eventually Health Canada is going to have to change too, because guess what? Millennials will be taking over leadership roles there, and they have a different set of needs. And one of the things that they're going to do is revolutionize and kind of rewrite the processes that we use today. So it all, as I said, it just kind of stems from this idea of respect. you can meet each other on the playing field of respect, and that can be a great starting point for both sides of the relationship.
And a better position to be in than to see the workforce starting and the workplace starting to shift and change without you having awareness of it or opportunity to shape and create it. Because as they move into these leadership roles, it's just going to start happening. When we talk about the less face time in the office, if they're moving into a leadership role, they now have an opportunity to potentially influence the flexibility that their team may have available, and it becomes a bit of natural course of working. So I do want to be mindful of our time. John, we have one last question that I'd like to put forward, and I know that there's so many that have come in, and we so appreciate everyone's contributions. And that is, what can organizations really do to attract millennials, and does it start with their internal culture?
I think the attraction of millennials does start a lot with, first and foremost, if it's a company that's a known brand, it's just the marketplace brand of whomever that entity is. Again, if you go back to the basic statistics, the millennials group overall is the most brand conscious, brand savvy age cohort group we have ever seen, certainly in North America, if not on the entire planet. So they are attracted to brands. Second, then take that inside the organization and think about the employment brand that's being promoted. And if you really, really want to attract millennials to your organizations, I'd suggest that you go back to those 5 basic values and try and think through how you are in real, authentic terms trying to create an environment, a culture, career pathing potentials, learning opportunities, so that they can say, yes, I think you understand who I am, because that's really what they're looking for, and that's really what's going to make the difference of whether A, they join your organization, and B, whether you deliver on that, and if you do, then you would be an organization that they would consider gets them. If, on the other hand, you don't think about it, you're not being flexible, you're not thinking through those values, they'll perceive you as an organization that doesn't get it, or potentially is misrepresenting the reality of what happens when I come inside the organization. And in that case, they will join, they will look around, assess, and leave, and go to someone else who does get it.
I think we just all have to kind of get past this idea that millennials are a mystery, that there are ways for us to take a look at what it is that they expect and value in a workplace, dispel some of the myths and shed some of our own perceptions, and take a look at the reality. And I know that as we prepared for our national tour and even for today, we've done a lot of reading about millennials and talked to a lot of millennials and had our millennial panelists. And John and I and our entire team and organization actually have learned so much about this cohort and what they can contribute and the influence that they're going to have on shaping everything from media to the way workplace dynamics run and operate, that it's important that we pay attention to how we can work more effectively with them, how we can learn from them, and also how we can help mentor them for those who are in older cohorts. They can benefit from the experience that you have to share, but it's going to take one of us to extend the olive branch and help to start that process. And we hope today was the beginning of that for you, just in terms of creating awareness.
And one thing we certainly learned going through the tour was organizations where they have extended that olive branch, where they've started those discussions, there was a real genuine excitedness about the fact that what started out as thinking about and making changes so that millennials would be more comfortable in the workplace actually became a more broad-based discussion that was beneficial for all in the organization. So it started as a millennial focus, but because the companies did the right thing in getting everybody involved in the discussion, they were actually able to create a groundswell of change that was beneficial to everybody. And as much as a sort of panacea as that sounds, it is quite possible to do. You just have to take that first step and be committed to it.
Absolutely. So for those of you who have hung on for the additional Q&A period, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for your contributions today through the chat panel, the polls, as well as through the question and answer. We will be following up with you to, again, give you a link to the recording of this session with the visual of the slides, and we'll also be able to give you details on how you'll be able to get access to a copy of our reality check survey, which should be released within the next week. I will also be releasing our newest catalog, which will actually have an editorial section that's focused on millennials and the multi-generational workforce. So keep an eye out for that as well. So just a reminder that as you wrap up today, you can, when you close out of WebEx, a survey will pop up for you, our post-webinar survey to complete and give us your feedback. And everyone who completes the survey will be entered into a draw for one free registration into our upcoming session of Engaging a Multi-Generational Workforce. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time today, and we'll look forward to seeing you at a future session.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us.